Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today we're talking about our healers in Endwalker. Just like yesterday, I don't have any Endwalker footage to show, so I'll just have some old gameplay running in the background. But I will be going over some of the changes that have happened, and then also give my thoughts on them. So starting with the general healer change, which is that all healers now have a 1.5 second cast time on their main DPS spell. So Glare, Malefic, Broil, and then Doses for Sage. Astrologian already had this ever since Stormblood, I believe, but now all of the other healers will be getting it as well. I feel like this wasn't super necessary for Scholar, seeing how they still have Ruin 2, but for White Mage especially, this is going to be quite amazing. Yes, we did get the Lily system added in Shadowbringers, and while that did help a lot with the movement and weaving issues the job had, it still didn't feel enough to me. Now, of course, I'm mainly a casual healer, and I saw some White Mage players talk about how now one of their main optimization points would be made a lot easier, but I still think that it is a welcome change. Also, implementing it for Scholar and Sage is nice, as it makes things feel a lot better. You don't have to be as mindful of slide casting when you're moving around, and in Scholar's case, if you only need one of global cooldown, you can now just weave it in after a broil and you don't need to use Ruin 2 instead. So I just think that this is a welcome change. So let's begin with White Mage and then work our way through the rest of the healers. First off, Presence of Mind is now 2 minutes. In Endwalker, they've tried to normalize the rotations to be around 1 or 2 minutes, so this change was to be expected. But it is something that I and many other players have been wanting for a very long time, as the cooldown just felt really weird. Divine Benison now has 2 charges, which is nice, just some extra mitigation, and Thin Air got reworked. It now has 2 charges, but will only nullify the mana cost for 1 spell. This is a pretty big change. Right now, White Mage mana management is pretty non-existent. Your Lily spells are free, you've got Lucid Dreaming, and then also Thin Air exists, so running out of mana is almost impossible unless you have to res a lot. With this change, you'll have to be a little bit more mindful of your mana. I'm sure you'll still be using Thin Air on glares here or there, just so that you don't overcap the skill, but you'll probably want to save a stack in case you need to throw out a res, as that would be the best usage for it. So it's a bit of a nerf if we're looking at phases where a lot of healing is needed, but it could be a little bit of a buff when we're looking to res players. Like if you have to res one person every minute, this would be amazing, because you'll always have a stack ready for that. So what about the new stuff? Well, we have a new ability that just gives some damage reduction to a target, so it's nice to throw on your tank during trash pulls or right before a tank buster hits. And you can of course pair this together with Divine Benison, as that is a shield, so these mitigations will stack together and will have some nice mitigation when paired together. And then we also have Lilybell. This is a Lilybell that you place on the floor, and then each time you take damage, the Lilybell will cast an AoE heal up to 5 times. If there are any stacks left over at the end of its duration, then it will use up all of those stacks for one final heal. The heal will be stronger depending on how many stacks you have left, but you'll only get half the potency per stack than if they were to trigger by taking damage. This is just an amazing skill. It's best used in scenarios where you will be taking multiple instances of damage, like for example the Softened Rage on Oracle of Darkness or the group stack in E10S with the Shadow Clones. And I'm sure that there will be plenty of other great spots where you could use this. But even for fights where you don't have multiple instances of rapid outgoing damage, you can still use this as a normal off-global cooldown heal, kind of like the Earthly Star from Astro. So I think it's a really cool ability. And then we also got some upgraded DPS tools. So overall, White Mage is looking to be a nice improvement over what we currently have. No huge skill changes outside of the Thin Air change, but mainly some quality of life stuff, especially with the change to Glare now being 1.5 second cast time, because that is going to be a really big change, especially for White Mage, as they used to be the most immobile job in the game, and yes, I'm including Black Mage to that as well. So some really nice changes. Let's move over to our second pure healer, Astrologian. So as I think most people expected, Endwalker Astrologian from a healer perspective will play in the same way as we currently play Diurnal Astro, seeing how the sects were removed now that Sage is being added to the game. So even though we didn't see a lot of changes on the healing side of the job, there were a few other changes that happened when we're looking at divination and the card system. So first off, draw. This now has 2 charges, which is quite nice, as it allows you to hold a charge ready for when raid buffs are coming out, so you can play that extra card. However, redraw has been changed so that you can now only use it once per card drawn. So I think this is going back to how it used to work in previous expansions. Sleeve draw has also been removed from the job, so it's going to be a lot more difficult to guarantee 3 different seals on your job gauge, because the built-in RNG mitigation of sleeve draw is now gone, seeing how we're losing the skill, and then we're also only getting 1 redraw per card. Now, for those that are worried about how it might affect your divination, because there's more RNG to getting 3 seals, then don't worry about that, because divination is now just an off-global cooldown that doesn't rely on seals anymore. It will always give the same damage buff. Instead, we now have a new ability that interacts with your seals, which is a self buff. If you have 1 seal, then you will just restore some MP. If you have 2 seals, you get MP plus a haste buff. If you have 3 seals, you get the MP, the haste buff, as well as a 5% damage and healing buff. So you'll still want to try and get 3 different seals, but at least it will only affect you and not the whole party if you can't get them. Now, if you're wondering about lords and ladies, to mitigate playing a card that has a seal that you don't want, like you would right now, then that is not possible anymore, because Minor Arcana has been brought back and it's now its own spell, like it was back in Stormblood, where you will either draw a lord, which will deal AoE damage, or a lady, which will be an AoE heal. So those are the changes to the existing skills and systems, but what about the new stuff? Well, just like White Mage, we got upgraded DPS tools. We also have a mitigation ability that gives damage reduction for a few seconds, and then it will also heal the target after its duration ends. So again, great to throw in a tank right before a tank buster, or even just as a normal off-global cooldown heal. And then we also have Macro Cosmos. This will do a few things for you. This will deal AoE damage when you use it, and it will apply a buff to your whole party. While the buff is active, it will store up to 50% of the damage that you take, and then when you reactivate the ability or the timer runs out, it will heal everyone for that 50% of all the damage that you took while the buff was active. So it's just like Lilybell, where this is going to be amazing in situations where you're taking a lot of damage, so that you can store up as much healing as possible and then get out the strongest heal possible. But of course, you can just use it right before a raid-wide AoE, and then afterwards you just get a heal from that. It's just that the more damage you take while it's active, the stronger the heal will be. So it's a really nice and also very flexible ability. Overall, I'm not too sure how I feel about the card changes. I would have liked to see the RNG mitigation from sleeve draw stay in the game, as we're still aiming to get 3 seals, even though it doesn't affect divination anymore. But outside of that, Az got some nice new tools that only add to the job. So let's move over to our 2 barrier healers, starting with Scholar. This one got memed on a fair bit after the job action trailer, because all it seemed we were getting was an in-combat sprint for the party, and while we didn't see a lot of changes, I still feel like Scholar will remain as a healer that I'll really enjoy playing. We'll just have to wait and see how much I enjoy Sage, as they both fill in that barrier healer slot. But seeing how I really like the current Scholar, because we didn't get too many changes, I'll still enjoy Endwalker Scholar as well. So, what has changed? Well, first off, we have Aetherflow. This now gives back double the MP, but Energy Drain now doesn't give MP back anymore. And this is good if you're using your Aetherflow stacks to heal a lot and not to DPS, but it does mean that we're getting less MP back overall, because you would often use a few leftover EDs here and there, and Dissipation exists, so if we're using that as another source to get more EDs, then we're losing out on even more mana. But we'll just have to wait and see how this will actually affect our mana management when the expansion comes out, and I'm sure that if it is too rough, that Square Enix will just give the mana aspect back to ED, or maybe some other way for us to generate mana. There have also been some conflicting reports on the Fairy being more responsive than it is currently, which I would be a big fan of, as it is currently one of my main complaints about Scholar, but because we've gotten some conflicting information, I'll just wait to find out for myself when Endwalker hits. If the Fairy is more responsive, then I'll be really happy. Adlo and Deployment Tactics also got buffed, in the sense that Adlo now creates a bigger shield, and Deployment Tactics is on a shorter cooldown, now lining up with Recitation. So what are our new skills? Well, just like the other healers, we got stronger DPS tools, and Ruin 2 still exists, which I think is really good because it would still be very useful when we have to move a lot or when we have to double weave. But as long as we don't need to double weave, we can just use that broil and then weave something after that, because we now have that shorter cast time like all the other healers. We then have Protraction. This is basically an AoE Thrill of Battle, as it will increase the max HP of everyone by 10% and also grant a 10% healing received buff. And this is great for a lot of reasons. First of all, it's mitigation in the form of more HP. Secondly, it will make the continuous heal checks easier, because you also get that healing received buff. and it will also boost certain other actions that scale off max HP. And you'll be able to pair this together with other healing boosting actions as well. So take this together with some other abilities and then the buffed Adlo, and you'll be able to make some really big shields when you need to. And then of course we have our meme skill, Expedient. This will give everyone a sprint buff, and it will also reduce the damage taken for 20 seconds. Now both of these effects are pretty good if I'm being honest. There are plenty of movement heavy mechanics in the game that can be made a lot easier if you have sprint for them, and there are also some fights where I would like to have a second sprint to make things easier. Yukop is a great example of that. Now of course I do know that if you're not expecting the sprint speed to be there, that it can create some awkward situations. I've run into AoEs plenty of times in Boja or Zadnor because someone used Impetus, I believe it is called, and then I can see something similar happening with this as well. But when it is used in a coordinated group, I think that this could be a really useful skill. Not only that, but it also gives 20 seconds of damage reduction, which is a lot. Now again, amazing to use in situations where there is a lot of continuous outgoing rate-wide damage, so while I can see why people would meme about this skill a little bit, I still think that it is going to be a great addition to the Scholar kit. Oh yeah, we also have no more gauge cost on Fey Blessing, but I never really felt like there was ever an issue that I didn't have enough gauge for this, but I guess that means that you can now use your Fairy Tether even more often than we already can now. So that leaves us with Sage, our new healer. Now Sage has a lot of similarities with Scholar in terms of their healing kit, but they still have enough differences to really set them apart. So first up is their job gauge. We have two resources, Adder's Sting, which I'll talk about in just a second, and Adder's Gall, which generates over time and you can stack it up to 3 times, sort of like the White Mage's Lilies, and then these stacks can be used on off-global cooldown healing abilities, and these will all also regenerate MP for you. A difference with Scholar here is that there is no energy drain equivalent, so it's only heals that you can use these stacks on. We have a Lustrate and an Indom equivalent, and then we also have an AoE damage mitigation that also applies a regen, and a single target heal that also applies a damage reduction. The damage reduction of these two skills cannot be stacked, by the way, but I do think that both are great. One you use right before a raid wipe, and then it will also regen your team afterwards, while the other is best used right before a tank buster to make sure your tank is topped off for the hit, and then you'll also grant them a damage reduction for the actual tank buster. We also have other off-global cooldown heals that are just on their own cooldown. Physis will grant us an AoE regen, kind of like Whispering Dawn from Scholar, and Physis 2 is a stronger regen, but it will also grant a 10% healing received buff. Holos is a simple AoE heal. Haima will grant a shield and 5 stacks to a target, and then each time that shield breaks, it will apply a new shield until you run out of stacks, and then at the end of the buff duration, all of the remaining stacks will be converted into a heal instead. And then we also have an AoE version of this skill. So kind of similar to the Lilybell of White Mage, it's just going to be giving you shields each time they break instead of healing like the Lilybell would do. For global cooldowns, we have a single target and an AoE spammable heal that we can also turn into a shielding spell by using Eucrasia. By doing so, the healing aspect becomes weaker, but then we'll also be granted a shield on top of that heal. When you have a leftover shield, because it either didn't break or because you shielded too late, then we can use Pepsis. This turns the shield into a heal instead. Each time your shield is broken, you will also be granted an Adder's Sting stack, which is that other resource on your job gauge, and this will allow you to use Toxicon, which is an AoE GCD ability. So we still have some utility and DPS tools left to talk about. Icarus is a gap closer that can target either an enemy or a party member. Zoe doubles the potency of the next healing spell, and a spell refers to a global cooldown, and Krasis will grant the party a healing received buff. We also have Cardia, which is similar to the passive healing that Scholar gets from their fairy. Cardia is a buff that you apply to a party member, and then each time you cast a damage GCD, that target will be granted a small heal. We also have an ability called Soteria, which will double this healing effect. So what do we have to do damage? Well, Dosis is our normal single target GCD, and we can use Eucrasia on this to turn it into a damage over time spell instead. Dyscrasia is our normal AoE spell, and as mentioned before, Toxicon is a stronger AoE spell, but it does require that Adder's Sting stack. Phlegma also deals high AoE damage, but it's on its own recast timer, and Pneuma will deal damage in a line in front of you while also providing an AoE heal and reducing damage taken for your party for 20 seconds, and this also has a 2-minute recast timer. So Sage is combining a lot of different aspects into one job and has me really excited to try it out. It has a focus on dealing damage so that you get that Cardia heal to come out as often as possible, and it has both off-global cooldowns that are just on their own timer, but they also have some that are tied to your job gauge. And then they also have some GCDs that are on their own cooldown as well. So there seems to be a fair amount of resource management involved, which I'm looking forward to quite a bit. And then we also have that Eucrasia buff that adds that little bit of extra flair to the job as well. Overall, it's looking to be a solid addition to the healer role, and I can't wait to try it out. Anyways, that does it for our healers, so I want to thank you for watching, I want to thank my Patreons for their support, and I'll see you in the next one.